In the heart of the 17th century, one man's vision was remaking the world. In a vast expanse of marshland outside Paris, a palace was rising, Versailles. It was more than a building, it was a statement of absolute power. A sun-drenched universe where every gilded mirror and manicured hedge was designed to reflect the glory of its creator, King Louis XIV, the Sun King. His court was the envy of Europe, a dazzling constellation of art, music, and intellect. But beyond the glow of Versailles, in the sprawling, ancient city of Paris, a different reality festered. Here, the narrow, unlit streets were slick with mud and refuse, and the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and desperation. It was a city of stark contrasts, of breathtaking cathedrals and shadowy alleyways where secrets were a form of currency, and life could be terrifyingly cheap. In these dark corners, a whisper had become an open secret. It was the talk of taverns and the fear of noble houses. If a wealthy uncle lingered too long, or a rival stood in the way of an inheritance, there was a solution, a discreetly administered remedy known as a powder de succession and inheritance powder. A sudden, violent illness would follow, baffling the physicians, whose knowledge was a fragile blend of science and superstition. A convenient passing, a fortune secured, and a few more coins in the pocket of a shadowy practitioner. This was not a rare occurrence. It was a creeping plague of paranoia and suspicion that threatened the very fabric of society. No one could be trusted. A sip of wine, a gift of sweets, even a lover's touch could conceal a final, agonizing end. The church preached of damnation, but its authority was fraying at the edges. A new age of reason was dawning. Yet for many, the old ways held more sway. When prayers failed, people turned to those who offered more tangible results. Fortune tellers who read fates in the cards, alchemists who promised gold from lead, and wise women who sold charms to win a lover's heart or to stop a rival's. Into this chaos stepped a new kind of man, Nicolas de la Reynie. He was not a nobleman or a courtier. He was a magistrate, a bureaucrat, a man of formidable intelligence, and an unshakable belief in order. When he was appointed as Paris' first Lieutenant General of Police, he found a city on the brink of anarchy. He saw the filth, the crime, and the pervasive fear not as an unsolvable curse, but as a problem of logistics. He organized the city's first public lighting system, created fire brigades, and began to map the labyrinthine underworld that thrived just beneath the surface of polite society. La Reynie was a rationalist in an age of superstition, a man who believed that darkness could be dispelled by light, and that truth could be found not in omens, but in evidence. He heard the whispers of the inheritance powders, and he knew this was a disease that had to be cut out before it consumed the entire kingdom. The kingdom itself revolved around a single, blazing star, Louis XIV. At Versailles, he was more than a monarch, he was a deity in human form. His every waking moment was a public performance, his favor the ultimate prize. The nobility of France, once powerful feudal lords, were now reduced to ornamental courtiers, their fortunes hanging on a royal glance, a whispered word of approval. To be close to the king was to have influence, wealth, and status. To be banished from his presence was a form of social demise. In this high-stakes game, no one had played their hand more brilliantly than Françoise Athnaise de Rochechart de Mortemart, the Marquise de Montespan. She was not the Queen of France, but in every way that mattered, she ruled Versailles. Breathtakingly beautiful, with a wit as sharp as a stiletto, Madame de Montespan had captivated the king completely. For over a decade, she was his official mistress, the mother of his beloved legitimized children, and the undisputed center of court life. Her apartments were the hub of power. Her word could make or break a career, and her style set the standard for all of Europe. She was a woman of immense intelligence and ambition who had achieved the pinnacle of power available to a woman in her time. But how does one hold on to such power when younger, more beautiful rivals are always circling, waiting for the king's gaze to wander? What bargains must be struck to remain the son to the Sun King? At this point, no one dared to ask. She was simply a star, untouchable and supreme. Then, In 1676, a crack appeared in the gilded facade of the aristocracy. A noble woman, the Marquise de Brinvilliers, was arrested. The charges were almost unthinkable. She stood accused of systematically ending the lives of her own father and two brothers, all to secure the family fortune and be with her lover. During the investigation, it was discovered that her tool was not a dagger, but a subtle poison, taught to her by her lover who had learned the craft in Italy. Her case revealed a horrifying truth. The shadowy world of poisoners was not confined to the back alleys of Paris. It had infiltrated the highest echelons of society. The scandal was a profound shock to the king. It was a direct assault on the natural, divinely ordained order of family and state. This was not merely a crime, it was a form of treason against his perfectly regulated world. Louis was shaken. The man who saw himself as the embodiment of France now saw a rot spreading through its veins. He summoned Nicolas de la Reynie. The quiet, methodical policeman was given a new, terrifying mandate. He was to hunt down this network of poisoners, no matter who they were, no matter how high their station. The king established a special tribunal to hear the cases, giving it a chilling, medieval name, the Chambre Ardente, the fiery chamber. With the full authority of the crown behind him, La Reynie began his investigation. He believed he was hunting for a handful of criminals. He had no idea he was about to pull a thread that would unravel the entire tapestry of the Sun King's court, leading him from the city's dregs into a darkness more profound than he could ever imagine. A darkness that coiled around the very steps of the throne itself. The hunt had begun. The fiery chamber was now open for business, and a palpable chill settled over Paris, a cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. Nicolas de la Reynie's investigation began not with a thunderclap, but with the painstaking work of pulling at loose threads. He started at the bottom, rounding up the city's fortune tellers, its street corner alchemists, and midwives with questionable reputations. In the cold, damp interrogation rooms of the Bastille, stories began to unfold. At first, they were tales of petty fraud, charms sold to hopeful lovers, fake horoscopes sold to anxious merchants. But under La Reynie's methodical pressure, a pattern began to emerge. The same name was whispered by different people, in different cells, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. It was the name of a woman who seemed to be the source of all these dark streams, the hub of this clandestine wheel. Her name was Catherine Montvoisin, but all of Paris knew her as La Voisin. To the outside world, she was the wife of a struggling jeweler, a respectable middle-class woman. But to her clients, she was a miracle worker. La Voisin was not some wild-eyed crone hiding in a hovel. She was a shrewd, charismatic entrepreneur who had built a formidable empire by understanding one simple truth: everyone has a secret desire and a secret fear. Her salon was a magnet for the desperate and the ambitious. A young wife, terrified of her husband's wandering eye, might come for a consultation. A nobleman, deep in debt, might seek a glimpse into his financial future. La Voisin offered them all a sense of control in a world governed by fate and royal whim. Her operation was a marvel of dark enterprise. She offered a wide range of services, tailored to the needs of her clientele. For a small fee, she could read a palm or cast a chart of the heavens. For a much larger sum, she provided more potent solutions. She ran a discreet network of women who could help ladies facing a delicate condition, offering remedies to restore their monthly regularity and erase a moment of indiscretion. Her most sought-after products, however, were her powders. They came in many varieties. There were powders of affection, blended from herbs, animal parts, and whispered incantations, designed to rekindle a fading passion. These were immensely popular among the women of the court, who lived in constant fear of being replaced. But then there were the other powders, the powders of dispatch. For a client whose patience had run out, La Voisin could provide a mixture that would bring about a swift conclusion to a troublesome life. Her network was vast. She had contacts with apothecaries who could procure rare substances, defrocked priests willing to bless her unholy concoctions, and a web of informants who kept her abreast of the latest court gossip, allowing her to tailor her prophecies with uncanny accuracy. La Rainey, the man of order, was fascinated and appalled by the scale of her business. This was not just crime, it was an entire shadow economy, a parallel society operating by its own rules. He didn't rely on rumor. His men seized account books, filled with coded entries, and lists of clients identified only by symbols or titles. They cross-referenced testimonies, broke down alibis, and slowly, piece by piece, they constructed a map of La Voisin's entire network. The net tightened. One by one, her key associates were taken into custody, midwives who supplied her with unspeakable ingredients, chemists who mixed the lethal formulas, and finally, in March of 1679, the spider at the center of the web was captured. La Voisin herself was arrested. Her trial was a sensation. She entered the courtroom not as a defeated criminal, but as a queen holding court, defiant and seemingly unafraid. She understood her power. She knew the secrets of half the noble families in Paris. But La Rainey and the judges of the fiery chamber were relentless. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of witnesses testified against her. She was found guilty and sentenced to face the ultimate penalty. In the days leading up to her final public appearance, she was interrogated one last time. Perhaps she hoped for a reprieve, a deal that would spare her life, or perhaps, facing her own end, she simply decided to pull the entire corrupt edifice down with her. She began to talk, and the names she spoke sent shockwaves through the heart of the kingdom. She listed counts, dukes, and marquises. She detailed their requests for powders to secure love, to remove rivals, to hasten inheritances. The scribes recording her words could barely keep their hands from trembling. This was no longer about back alley crime. This was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the French nobility. But then she paused. With the smoke of her own pyre already seeming to stain the air, La Voisin played her final, most devastating card. She spoke of her most important client, a client whose needs were greater, whose ambition was more vast, and whose payments were more lavish than any other. She didn't speak a name. She didn't have to. She described a woman at the absolute summit of power, a woman terrified of a younger rival, a woman who would do anything, to maintain her hold on the king's affections. The investigators froze. The king's mistress, the mother of his children. The accusation was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that to even write it down felt like an act of treason. The hunt for a few poisoners had led them to the very steps of the throne, and the woman who held all the answers was about to be consumed by flames. The flames that consumed La Voisin did not purify Paris, they cast a longer, darker shadow. Her final, unspoken accusation hung in the air, a ghost that could not be exorcised. For Nicolas de la Rainey, the investigation had now entered a terrifying new phase. The trail no longer led through the city's underworld, but into the gilded heart of the kingdom. It led to Versailles. To walk through the palace was to witness a world perfected. Sunlight streamed through impossibly tall windows, glinting off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. The air was perfumed with flowers and expensive wax. Yet now, a new, unspoken tension coiled beneath the veneer of courtly grace. Every polite smile seemed to hide a question. Every whispered conversation seemed to carry a hint of accusation. At the center of this silent storm was Madame de Montespan. From the outside, she was as radiant as ever, her wit still the sharpest in any room. But those closest to her could see the hairline fractures appearing in her magnificent composure. Her power, once absolute, was no longer secure, and the reason had a name: Angelique de Fontanges. She was everything Montespan was not: young, innocent, gentle, and unburdened by ambition. The king, perhaps growing weary of Montespan's brilliant but demanding nature, was increasingly captivated by this new, placid beauty. His gaze, which had once been Montespan's exclusive property, now lingered on Mademoiselle de Fontanges. For a woman who had built her entire world on being the king's one desire, this was not just a heartbreak, it was an existential threat. To lose the king's favor meant losing everything: her status, her influence, her magnificent apartments, her very identity. We can only imagine the cold dread that must have crept into her heart as she watched the king's passion for her cool into mere affection, while it ignited for another. This was the motive La Rainey had been searching for, not simple greed, but the desperate terror of a queen about to be deposed. Armed with La Voisin's ledgers and the testimony of her associates, La Rainey's investigators began to move with surgical precision. They did not confront Montespan directly. That would be unthinkable. Instead, they circled her, interviewing her ladies-in-waiting, questioning her servants, tracing the network of intermediaries who moved between her apartments and the darker corners of Paris. The connections began to solidify. Testimony confirmed that powders and potions from La Voisin had indeed been delivered to Montespan's household. At first, the explanations seemed almost plausible, even mundane by the standards of the court. They were love charms, potions to ensure the king's continued affection, talismans to ward off rivals. It was foolish, it was superstitious, but was it a crime worthy of the fiery chamber? Many women at court resorted to such things. It was a desperate act, but perhaps an understandable one. La Rainey felt he was on the verge of containing the scandal, of proving that the king's mistress had merely dabbled in foolish magic. But the deeper they dug into La Voisin, the words of the Abbe Giborg fell like stones into the silent chamber, shattering any remaining hope of containing the scandal. This was no longer a matter of courtly intrigue or dabbling in folk magic. It was an accusation of the most profound evil imaginable. The king himself, a devout Catholic who saw himself as God's chosen representative on earth, was now faced with a possibility so monstrous it bordered on the surreal. Could the woman who had shared his bed, the mother of his children, have participated in rituals designed to summon the forces of hell? Nicolas de La Rainey, a man of logic and reason, found himself investigating a crime that seemed to have been ripped from the pages of the darkest folklore. But his duty was clear. He had to follow the evidence, no matter how fantastic the destination. The investigators now had a choice. They could dismiss Giborg's testimony as the ravings of a broken old man, a desperate attempt to implicate a powerful figure to save himself, or they could believe him. And if they believed him, they had to understand everything. The interrogation intensified, focusing now not on if, but on how. The details that emerged painted a picture of calculated blasphemy. Giborg and other witnesses, including his own mistress and assistant, Francois Philaster, began to corroborate each other's stories, adding layers of horrifying detail. They described the setting, not a grand cathedral, but a squalid room in a Parisian townhouse or a disused, abandoned chapel. Always at night, always in absolute secrecy. The ritual, they claimed, was a grotesque parody of the Holy Sacrament. An altar was prepared, but instead of consecrated stone, it was the naked body of the client. On at least 3 separate occasions, they testified. That client was Madame de Montespan. She would lie there, candles burning at her head and feet, while Giborg, dressed in corrupted vestments, began the incantations. The prayers were inverted, the name of God replaced with the names of demons. They cited to in particular, with chilling consistency, Asmodeus, the demon of lust, and Ashtaroth, a crowned duke of hell. The purpose of these rituals, they insisted, was explicit: to bind the king's will to Montespan, to make him blind and deaf to any other woman, and to renew his fading passion with a supernatural fire. But it was the next revelation that pushed the case into the abyss. This infernal magic required a sacrifice. According to the testimonies of Giborg, Philaster, and even La Voisin's own daughter, Marguerite, the rituals demanded the most potent offering of all, the life of an innocent. They described a network of disreputable midwives who would procure newborn infants, often the unwanted children of the city's poor. These children, they claimed, would be brought to the ceremony. Giborg would perform a twisted version of a baptism over the child. Before its life was taken upon the living altar, its blood, they alleged, was then collected in a chalice mixed with other substances and the consecrated host of the Eucharist, creating a potent filter. This final concoction would then be carefully passed to Montespan's servants, to be secretly administered to the king and his food or wine. La Rainey was now confronted with a cascade of mutually reinforcing testimony. Was it possible? Could this be the truth? He ordered a search of the Abgeborg's quarters. They found ritual implements, books filled with demonic sigils, and written incantations that matched the words repeated by the witnesses. The physical evidence seemed to support the unbelievable stories. Then, a historian within La Rainey's team made a chilling discovery. He cross-referenced the dates of the alleged rituals with the king's own journals and court records. The most extreme ceremony, according to Giborg, took place in 1673. Court records for that exact period showed a dramatic, almost miraculous rekindling of the king's passion for Montespan. Just when everyone believed their affair was ending, he lavished her with gifts, including a new palace, and seemed utterly enthralled, unable to spend a moment away from her. To the rational mind, it could be a coincidence, but in the superheated atmosphere of the fiery chamber, it felt like damning proof. But another, more cynical possibility began to haunt La Rainey: the method of interrogation itself. Torture was a legal and accepted part of the judicial process. The question was applied to extract confessions, and the more a witness resisted, the more severe the methods became. The boot, a device that progressively crushed the legs, was notoriously effective at making people talk. Could these incredible stories be the product of agony and fear? Were the accused simply telling the judges what they wanted to hear, weaving ever more fantastic tales to satisfy their interrogators and bring an end to the pain? Each new confession implicated more people, creating a domino effect of accusations. The scandal was feeding on itself, growing larger and more monstrous with every session of the fiery chamber. The judges were looking for a conspiracy of Satanists, and the accused, under unimaginable duress, were giving them exactly that. The truth was becoming hopelessly entangled with fantasy. The line between evidence and hysteria dangerously blurred. The investigation had now reached its absolute zenith. La Rainey had followed the thread from the back alleys of Paris to the foot of the throne. He had dozens of confessions, all pointing to the king's mistress as the mastermind of a demonic plot. He had physical evidence and circumstantial corroboration, but he also had the gnawing doubt that this entire edifice of horror might be a phantom, a monstrous fiction born of torture and mass panic. The time for investigation was over. He compiled his final, explosive report, a document so sensitive that its contents could shatter the French monarchy. He requested an audience with the king. He had to present Louis XIV with an impossible choice. Before him lay the sworn testimony that the mother of his children was a monster who communed with devils and sacrificed infants to maintain her power. What would the Sun King do when faced with a darkness so profound it threatened to extinguish his light forever? The weight of the kingdom seemed to rest on the shoulders of one man. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the absolute monarch who ruled by divine right, sat alone with La Rainey's reports. The document was a testament to a horror he could barely comprehend. It detailed not just poisonings and political intrigue, but a descent into a primeval darkness he thought his enlightened age had banished. Every page implicated the woman who had dominated his heart for more than a decade. The choice before him was not merely legal, it was dynastic, personal, and spiritual. On one hand lay justice. The fiery chamber had been his creation, a tool to cleanse his kingdom of a creeping evil. It had uncovered a conspiracy that, if the testimonies were true, led directly to an attempt on his own life and will, orchestrated by the person he trusted most. Justice demanded a public trial, a final verdict, and a punishment that would demonstrate that no one, not even the mother of royal children, was above the law. But on the other hand lay the stability of the throne itself. To put Madame de Montespan on trial would be to put the monarchy in the dock. It would mean broadcasting to the world that the court of Versailles, the pinnacle of civilization, was a nest of Satanists. It would expose the king's own private life to the grubby hands of public speculation. How could he, the most Christian king, admit that he had been enthralled 4 years by a woman in league with demons? It would shatter the sacred mystique of the crown and provide endless ammunition to his enemies, both at home and abroad. The scandal would not just be about Montespan, it would be about him. His judgment, his piety, his very manhood would be questioned. It was a price too high to pay. Louis made his decision. It was the act not of a judge, but of a king. In 1682, he issued a royal edict. The Chambre ardente was to be suspended, effective immediately. The great investigation was over. For the lower-level conspirators, justice would be swift and brutal. La Voisin had already burned. The Abbe Giborg, his mistress, and more than 30 others met the same fate, their public executions serving as a grim warning. But for the aristocrats implicated in the scandal, there would be no public reckoning, and for Madame de Montespan, there would be neither trial nor exoneration. There would only be the king's crushing, silent judgment. In a move of extraordinary secrecy, Louis commanded that all documents from the investigation pertaining to Montespan be removed from the official archives. They were placed in a locked black chest, sealed with the king's personal seal, and hidden away. The truth, whatever it was to be buried. It would not see the light of day for more than a century. The king had not chosen justice or mercy, he had chosen silence. For Madame de Montespan, the aftermath was a unique and terrible kind of punishment. She was not sent to the executioner's block or exiled to a distant convent. She was forced to remain at Versailles, a living ghost in the palace she once ruled. She kept her luxurious apartments, her servants, her titles, but the lifeblood of her existence, the king's favor, was cut off completely. He would never again speak to her in private. In public, he treated her with a chilling, formal politeness that was more damning than any outburst of rage. The courtiers, who could sense the shift in the royal weather like animals sensing an earthquake, immediately understood. The woman they had once flocked to, flattered, and feared was now a pariah. To be seen in her company was to risk one's own standing. Her magnificent rooms, once the vibrant center of court life, grew quiet and empty. She was isolated, marooned in a sea of splendor. Her final years were a long, slow fall from grace. The vibrant, witty woman who had dazzled Europe was replaced by a figure haunted by fear and consumed by a desperate, public piety. She wore coarse hair shirts beneath her silk gowns, fasted to the point of emaciation, and spent vast sums of her fortune on charities, as if trying to buy her way back into God's grace. Her servants whispered of her terrors. She refused to sleep without dozens of candles burning. Terrified of the darkness, she employed food tasters, convinced that the poisons she had allegedly sought for others were now being prepared for her. Was it guilt? Was she haunted by the memory of unspeakable acts performed in darkened rooms? Or was it the paranoia of a woman unjustly accused, terrified of enemies she couldn't see? We will never know. She became a magnificent ruin, a testament to the corrosive nature of power sought and lost. The affair of the poisons did not bring down the French monarchy, but it left a permanent scar. The illusion of the nobility's innate moral superiority was shattered. For the philosophers of the burgeoning Enlightenment, the scandal was a perfect illustration of the corruption and superstition inherent in absolute monarchy and an unquestioning church. It fueled the fires of critique that would, a century later, explode into revolution. The scandal also forced a transformation in French law and society. The blatant use of torture to secure escalating confessions brought the practice into disrepute, accelerating the shift toward more rational methods of investigation. La Rainey's work laid the foundation for modern, organized policing. The monarchy itself changed. The position of official royal mistress would never again carry the same political power. The court became a more regulated, more suspicious place, and what of the truth, locked away in the king's black box? When the French Revolution finally broke the monarchy and the archives were thrown open, historians found the missing documents. They read the raw, terrifying testimonies. But the papers offered no simple answer. They revealed a king torn, his own margin notes showing a man wrestling with belief and doubt. His decision to suppress the evidence, rather than exonerate Montespan, has been seen by many as a tacit admission that he believed at least some of the charges were true. He could not prove her innocence, so he buried the accusation. In the end, we are left with the same chilling ambiguity that faced the king. Was Madame de Montespan a diabolical monster, or the victim of a colossal miscarriage of justice, a witch hunt fueled by political envy and testimony extracted by pain? The story of the affair of the poisons is not a simple morality tale of good versus evil. It's a story about the terrifying grey areas in between. It reveals how the hunger for power, the fear of losing it, and the willingness to believe the worst of others can create a poison far more potent than any substance mixed in an alchemist's lab. The ghosts of Versailles, whether real or imagined, still whisper their cautionary tale. They speak of the darkness that can lurk behind the most beautiful facade, and of the terrifying truth that sometimes the most powerful man in the world cannot conquer the secrets of the human heart. As we step back from this dark journey, we are left suspended between two terrifying possibilities. The affair of the poisons forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, desperation, and the fragile line between civilization and barbarity. In the figure of Madame de Montespan, we see not a simple monster, but perhaps something more unsettling, a human being pushed to unimaginable extremes by a system that offered her immense privilege, but no legitimate power. Her story is a stark reminder of what can happen when one's entire existence depends on the fickle affections of a single person. The image that haunts history is not the courtier glittering in diamonds, but the desperate woman allegedly lying upon a makeshift altar, willing to partake in unspeakable rites to preserve her fading influence. Whether this scene was a grim reality or the fevered product of minds broken by torture, its very possibility speaks to a moral void at the heart of that golden age. In a world where a woman's power was borrowed, not owned, and where the church itself could be twisted to serve ambition, perhaps such dark bargains were not an aberration, but an inevitability. What makes this scandal so perpetually chilling is how it rips away the romantic veneer of the past. Versailles, that enduring symbol of culture and refinement, is revealed as a beautiful mask, concealing depths of fear and moral compromise. It reminds us that evil rarely announces itself with monstrous features. It often wears the face of sophistication, whispers in the most cultured halls, and is born from passions we all recognize: love, ambition, and the terror of being forgotten. The fate of the children in these testimonies is perhaps the affair's most damning indictment. If even a fraction of the accusations were true, society's most innocent and vulnerable members were treated as mere commodities, their lives extinguished to serve the interests of its most privileged. This transforms the story from one of individual corruption into a judgment on an entire social system that failed to protect those who could not protect themselves. Yet, we must be wary of simple conclusions. We must remember the role of torture, the political motivations that swirled around the investigation, and the climate of fear where accusations could spread like a contagion. The affair of the poisons stands as one of history's most potent warnings about the capacity of a justice system to create the very monsters it purports to hunt, extracting confessions that confirm pre-existing biases rather than revealing objective truth. The story of Madame de Montespan, whether she was guilty or innocent, ultimately became a cautionary tale written by others. The core elements of this 17th century drama remain depressingly familiar: the abuse of power, the exploitation of the vulnerable, the destructive force of paranoia, and the willingness to believe the worst of those we envy or fear. The specific methods may have changed, but the human capacity for self-deception and cruelty remains a constant across the centuries. In the end, the affair of the poisons is one of history's great unresolved mysteries, and that is precisely where its power lies. It denies us the comfort of a simple verdict, forcing us instead to look into the darkness and see our own world reflected there. It warns us about the price of absolute power, the fragility of truth in the face of fear, and the terrible bargains people will make when they believe their survival is at stake. Most of all, it reminds us that beneath the most beautiful surfaces can lurk the darkest secrets, and that the ultimate cost of holding on to power may be the loss of one's very humanity. The story of Madame de Montespan and the affair of the poisons is sealed, not by a final verdict, but by the enduring silence of a king. It has become a dark mirror, reflecting the eternal struggle between ambition and morality, faith and fear. History is filled with such stories, locked rooms and buried secrets that, once uncovered, changed the way we see the world. To explore more of these hidden histories, and to understand the events that secretly shaped our present, subscribe to our channel and join us on our next investigation.